Amen. It's a good day, isn't it? Amen. It's good to be here. Amen. We praise God. Amen. For our coming together this morning. And we know that our coming together is not in vain. So if you have your Bibles, open up your Bibles to the book of Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah. We're talking about the chaotic kingdom stage, and we started talking about it 2 Sundays ago with Sister Jean, and we started talking about the prophet Jeremiah 2 Sundays ago with Sister Jean, and this is going to be a pretty long, Jeremiah's a pretty long book, and so we're going to be here for just a little while. Although, you know, Jeremiah's message is one message, but we'll talk about several of the things that happened during the time that he ministered up until the time that the Jews went into captivity in Babylon. So you have your Bibles. We're in Jeremiah, the 2nd chapter, as Jeremiah is being led by the Lord. And that's one thing we know about Jeremiah, is that he didn't strike out on his own, is that God gave him a message. And he carried that message, even though he started out a little reluctantly, and knowing that the odds were stacked against him, he carried the message anyway, because God said to him, I'm going to fortify you. I'm going to make it where when you look at them, you won't even see them, because I got something for you to do. And it's something that they need to hear. Now, they're not going to want to hear it. They don't want to hear it because, you know, right. And even so today, we know that when right is going forward, people don't want to hear it, do they? It's something about it. It's just something in us that that makes us want to buck up against what is right, even when we know it's right. When we know it's right, it's just something that's in us that we go contradictory to what we know. And so Jeremiah's call came from the Lord. The Lord fortified him to do the work that he had to do, to root out, to pull down, to destroy, to throw down, to build, and to plant. God said, I'm going to equip you to make it through whatever it is that I have to give you. And so God, through Jeremiah, began to catalog the sins of Israel. And, you know, it's an old story. It is something that we're very familiar with. God said to them through Jeremiah, you're like an unfaithful wife. You're like an unfaithful wife. In Jeremiah, the 2nd chapter, God began to say to them, you know what? Y'all something, because you want me when you need me. You want me when you need me. You know, when y'all were down in Egypt and y'all were crying out, oh, Lord, you cried out, you cried. And I came to your rescue. He said, for a little while, y'all acted all right. You know, I brought you out because y'all asked me. I heard you cry. I brought you out. I shepherded over you. I watched over you. I led you out. And I gave you everything you needed in that journey. It was in a wilderness. Now, to have everything you need in a wilderness is a testimony. Yeah. It's a testimony. Pastor Bland?
So, what you're saying is the difference between wanting somebody and wanting your help?
See, it was when it was convenient for them. That's when they wanted to take advantage of what God had for them. When it was convenient for them. But see, that's kind of like, you know, and we can relate to that in the natural Brother Robert, can you take that and just turn that? Well, you know what? I think it's already on. I'm just going to take it off mute, and you just hold on to it if somebody has something to say. Or you can take it off mute now. In a natural soul, when we get something new, we play with it until we get tired of it. And you see your children at Christmas time, they ask for all that stuff, and then they get it and they play for it 3 or 4 days. They play with it 3 or 4 days, and then they put it to the side and they go get an old cardboard box, and they play with the cardboard box. You know, you when it's new, you know, it's new, it's sparkly, it's shiny, and you just want to. And so that covenant relationship they had with God, it was new. It was a new thing. It was a new thing, and God treated them like they hadn't been treated before, better than they had ever been treated. Right. And so, while it was new, you know, they went along with him, but then it got old. It got old. It got old. And then they wanted to, they said, you know what? We want to try something different. Pastor Bland?
Lady Deborah, I think that the problem between man and God has always been that man wants to take care of himself.
Mm.
And God demands, he tried to show him, you can't make it without me. And so, of course, when when I got bills that need to be paid, I got a child that's in jail, or I can see then.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
God, I need you.
It becomes clear, doesn't
But
it?
as long as I can handle it and everything, I don't. Yeah, as long as I can handle it, I don't need you.
Right.
And
right.
that's, I think you talk about the covenant relationship with God. I think that's what. Let me just speak for myself. I think that's what I struggle with. It's where, and then you say, where it says that it's impossible to please God without faith. Well, then faith is me, God saying something, me believing it and letting God do it. But I don't want to have faith. I want to do it myself.
Yes.
And then if I do it myself, then I can get some credit for it. I can't get, if God does everything, that means I've got to sometimes wait. I got to have patience. I got to wait on him to do it. Then I got to understand that he know how to do it better than I do. I tell you what, that's something else for me. I fell out with Lady Deborah yesterday. She don't know it. I didn't say nothing. I ain't through, Brother Dave. Well, maybe that's the Spirit saying I need to be through. But I'm going to tell you what it was.
Hold on just a second.
Hold on. I'm going to tell you what it was. Just something just simple as this right here. Is the people that asked about cutting the yard, and she had told them, no, it's going to rain. Well, I'm looking at my yard. Even though I don't cut yards, I like for my yard to look good. So I'll pay for it to get cut, and I'm going to pay for it. And so I called her and tell her, I said, well, do you think it ain't going to rain for 3 or 4 hours? You think you can go and get it cut? No, I don't want it. And I felt some kind of way about that. What I thought was, when did it get to be your say so? Why couldn't you just say, well, what do you think? Can we come for whatever? But anyway, all right. I got that out now.
I ain't gonna talk too much. No, I was just saying what I was just going back on what he said. That would be something like, would be kind of canceling out just when you're trying to step out and do it yourself. Mm-hmm. It cancels out whatever the God you trying to do it on your own, and that way when you step
Sister
out
Gina,
there,
then you.
you just cancel out what God just moves out the way and let you try to handle.
Certainly.
I
have a question for Pastor. Pastor, you told us once why the land was so important for the Israelites. Now tell me that again, because in my studying, I forgot. Why is the land so important?
Because in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, okay? And the earth, this was given to the nation of Israel. Our blessings is in heavenly places, not here on earth.
Okay.
And so all the promises of God, like through Abraham to the nation of Israel, is tied to the land. And so,
I noticed in my study that he told them that they had, because of their idolatry, it had affected.
Polluted the land.
And that's why I asked you that question.
well, it's kind of like this right here. Give me that marker. Yeah, but this is for you. And I give it to you. And if you look at Leviticus 27 and what is it, babe? Deuteronomy 27, 28, he makes, it's a blessing and a curse. Remember when Lady Deborah took us through that? They stood on one hill and on another hill. But the church tries to take the promises to themselves, and that's all they talk about is, you're going to be the head and not the tail and everything. And they never studied to see what that was all about. He said that, because God, all of it was tied to God using Israel to bring everybody else in. And if they didn't complete their function by doing that, because how could I lead Robert to God and I done gone after other gods?
That's right. You're right.
And what he gave them as their possession was that land. That land. That's why come we so messed up. We ain't got no land.
Tech Vandal, take it to Brother Alex, please. Brother Alex.
Getting back to the pastor, what he said earlier, it's about being a strong man. And one of the worst things you can be is a strong man because your ego is always involved. One of the best teaching he does with us is to live in the spirit, not in the flesh. And sometimes when your wife, you perceive it to be overruling you, sometimes you need to step out the way and just let it go and not be an egotistical maniac. Sometimes, you know, our problem with black men, we so fragile emotionally that we have no kind of sense of self where we're strong enough to be meek. Humility. And like I said, a lot of times you can avoid a lot of stuff by just laying back, let it go. Knowing that you are the stronger vessel. Let it go.
So,
That's enough.
but anyway, you brought up a point that I was going to get back to when Pastor Bland was talking about the Bible. And that is humility. All you were saying, I think, what I heard you say in your exhortation is that you gotta be humble enough to admit that you need him in the good times and you need him in the bad times. That takes humility. It takes some humility. And that's just something that doesn't come easy. It goes against our grain. It goes against our grain to be humble. And so that is basically the predicament that Israel found themselves in time after time after time. They would not humble themselves. You know, and God had to tell them so many times, you know, just come on down. Come on, bring it down a notch. I can help you when you're humble. As a matter of fact, that's when I do my best work. When your spirit is contrite and when you're broken, I can come in and do my best work. But y'all always got your head up here. And so what I have to do is I have to come in and chasten you to make you realize that you can't do nothing without me. And so he went on and he says this, and we started talking about this last Sunday, Sister Kathy, when he said, if you go from east to west, you can look all up and down, all around, and you're not going to ever find anybody to act as foolish as y'all act. You're not going to find it because they stay true to their gods, but you go whoring after other gods. You go whoring after them, and you know they don't do anything. They can't do anything. They're fashioned, they're gods that's been fashioned with their hands. They had to make their ears and nose and mouths. But you got a God who can hear you. You got a God who can hear everybody at the same time and meet everybody's needs at the same time. But y'all so foolish. You just go around and so now you have prostituted yourself. And now you won't, and what happens is God said as an unfaithful, you're not even ashamed. Now it's something when you're doing your stuff and you're not ashamed, you really are reprobate then. When you go on and you're doing what you're doing, sometime when you start out, you don't want nobody to know. You don't want nobody to see you. You start out in the dark. But then when you keep on and you keep on, you don't care who sees you. You do it in the daytime. You doing it with whoever you want to do it with. And then you dare somebody to say something to you about it. And that's where the humility comes in. This is God, and that's where the humility comes in. And so God says, you have forsaken me, a fountain of living water, and you've gone and you've hewn out your own wells. And you just didn't see, this is to tell you how flawed you are. You hew out a well that's already broken. It's already broken. So it's already flawed. Your thinking is already flawed. And so we talked last Sunday about how those wells could have anything in them, how those cisterns could have anything in them, any kind of dirt and rubbish and dead animals and all kind of excrement that comes from the animals, and everything comes up in them. Why would you want that when you could have a fountain of living water? God said, your thinking is off. Your thinking is off. And that lets us see, Lord, when we get off, we get way off. And it takes a changed mind. It takes God to come in and touch your mind to turn you back around. Pastor Bland?
I think it's a blessing when you can come to the place that you just can't tell yourself out there before.
You better say that.
It's a hurtful place. It's a hard place to come to. When you can honestly from your heart that, you know what, I've done it before.
Yeah. So true. So true. And so in chapter 2, verse 14, he said, is Israel a servant? Is he a homeborn slave? Why is he spoiled? Now, Israel, I don't know. It's something they wanted to be free, but they loved to be held captive. They wanted to be free, but they were captive in their mind. And God had redeemed them from Egypt, gave them freedom in Canaan, but now their nation had gone back into bondage because of its idolatry. Now, they may not have seen it. They may not have seen it like that, but that's what it was. And so, they had this habit of running to Egypt and going to the other nations to try to help them. It says the young lions, I'm in verse 15, the young lions roared upon him and yelled, and they made his land waste. His cities are burned without inhabitant. Also, the children of Noth and Tahaphanes have broken the crown of thy head. Have thou not procured this unto thyself, in that thou hast forsaken the Lord thy God when he led thee by the way? And now, what hast thou to do in the way of Egypt, to drink the waters of Sihor? Or what hast thou to do in the way of Assyria, to drink the waters of the river? They always wanted to go to those nations to try to help them. And those nations couldn't do anything for them. They ended up being a vassal or being subjugated to those nations. And so, they wanted to be free, but they didn't know how to enjoy their freedom. Didn't know how to enjoy it. And so God began to, through Isaiah, compared them to a stubborn animal. Just has several things that he compared them to. A stubborn animal. He says, for of old time, I'm way over in verse 20. He says, for of old time I have broken thy yoke and burst thy bands, and thou saidest, I will not transgress. When upon every high hill and upon every green tree thou wanderest, playing the harlot. But so, you won't even wear the yoke. You won't even wear the yoke that's put upon you. And so then he says, and two, you're like a good vine that I planted. I planted you in good soil. Talking about them being tied to the land. Planted you in good soil, but now you coming up giving up wild grapes. He says, yet I have planted thee a noble vine, wholly a right seed. How then art thou turned into the degenerate plant of a strange vine unto me? And so he says that, look at verse 22, for though thou wash thee with nitre and take thee much soap, yet thine iniquity is marked before me, saith the Lord God. So here, when a body or person is defiled, a lot of times the way they got clean was symbolic washing. And so God is saying through Jeremiah that no amount of good works you do, no amount of religious ceremonies could wash away the sins that you've committed. Because what's the problem? The problem is not the outward, your body, it's an inward thing. It's going to take more than washing your body to clean you up. It's going to take more than you going to the temple to clean you up. It's going to take more than the sacrifices you're making to clean you up. And that's what they always wanted to do. And that's kind of what we want to do this day. You know, when we really, really mess up, we say, okay, Lord, I'm going to go to church every Sunday. I'm going to go to church every Sunday for the next month. Okay, Lord, you know. And we start listing out what we're going to do, the good works and how I'm going to pay my tithe every month. You know, we do that, trying to bargain with the Lord, but it wasn't an outward thing, it was an inward thing. So sinful hearts equals stubborn hearts. Sinful hearts equals stubborn heart. He says Josiah's reformation was only a cosmetic change. And remember now, Jeremiah started ministering, prophesying during the time of Josiah. So Josiah had lots of reformations. Let's go over to 2 Kings to take a look at what was going on during the time of Josiah's reign and some of the things that he did. So if we go over to 2 Kings, we can go to, let's see, 2 Kings, I believe around about the 23rd or 24th chapter. Second Kings. Okay, so we know that, let's go to Josiah 23. So we know that when they were, Josiah had sent the high priest to the temple, they were looking to see how much money had been raised, and in the course of them going to the temple to look at some things, they found the book of the law. And they brought the book of the law to Josiah. And when Josiah read it, he rent his clothes because he realized how far removed the kingdom was from what they should have been doing. And so his heart was compelled to do the right thing. His heart was compelled to make some sweeping changes in the kingdom. And in chapter 23, verse 4, it says, "And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, and the priests of the second order, and the keepers of the door, to bring forth out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal." Now you see how far they had sunken into degradation. You got in the temple that's been dedicated to the Lord, you got vessels that belong to Baal in the same temple. So they had gone so far down. They had sunken so low. And it says, "And for the grove and for all the hosts of heaven, and he burned them without Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and carried the ashes of them unto Bethel. And he put down the idolatrous priest, whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah, and in the places round about Jerusalem. Them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun and to the moon and to the planets and to all the host of heaven." You see how and you can see this plainly when you go back to Jeremiah, how God says through Jeremiah, "You've committed whoredoms on every hill, every high place. You worship in everything." Everything. So, he brought out the grove from the house of the Lord without Jerusalem unto the brook Kidron, and burned it at the brook Kidron, and stamped it small to powder, and cast the powder thereof upon the graves of the children of the people. And he brake down the houses of the Sodomites that were at the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the grove. And he brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah, and defiled the high places where the priests had burned incense, from Geba to Beersheba, and brake down the high places of the gates that were in the entering in the city of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were on a man's left hand at the gate of the city. I'll just stop there. That just gives you some idea of some of the things that he did, the reformations that he had during that time. And they were many. But it was just cosmetic, because the people's heart did not change. The people's heart did not change. And so we go back over to Jeremiah, the 2nd chapter, look at verse 23. Even if the people denied that they were defiled, see, their actions proved otherwise, for they were like animals. And here's what he said: how canst thou say, I am not polluted? I have not gone after Balaam. See thy way in the valley, know what thou hast done. Thou art a swift dromedary, traversing her ways, a wild ass used to the wilderness, snuffing up the wind at her pleasure, in her occasion. Who can turn her away? And so like a camel here, a dromedary, a camel looking for water, and then a donkey that's in heat. And you know that makes you go just crazy. If you've seen animals in heat, they'll just do anything until they're satisfied. And so God says, you're just like that. And so he says, without thy foot from being unshod and thy throat from thirst, but thou saidest, there is no hope, no, for I have loved strangers, and after them will I go. You see, so then they were so messed up. They had so much sin in their lives, and they realized this, and so they were saying back to Jeremiah here that, well, it's no use. Why should we turn back to the Lord? Because of all that we've done. But how many of you know it's never too late? Never too late. It's never too late. It's never too late. And so they had given themselves so much to sin that they despaired of being saved. It's no use, it's hopeless. That's what that means there in the verse that I just read. But I say here on the slide, but God specializes. That's right when God can come in and do something with you. The songwriter says, have you any rivers that seem uncrossable? Have you any mountains that you cannot tunnel through? Then God specializes in doing things that seem impossible. And he can do, the songwriter says, what no other power can do. And I believe that because I've seen him work that way. In verse 26, he says, as the thief is ashamed when he is found, so is the house of Israel ashamed. They, their kings, their princes, and their priests and their prophets, saying to a stock, thou art my father, and to a stone, thou hast brought me forth. Now, it just reminded me, as I was reading that, it reminded me of Mother Nunn, who's not here this morning. But she says so often, you know, when she's talking about how children are acting everything, I believe her saying is, you act like you were raised by a buzzard and hatched by the sun. And that's God is saying, that's what y'all doing with these idols. You're going after these idols like they're the ones that brought you out. Like they're the ones who did for you. And they're not. They're not. He says, but for they have turned their back unto me and not their face. But in the time of their trouble, they will say, arise and save us. But where are thy gods that thou hast made thee? Let them arise. If they can save thee in the time of thy trouble, for according to the number of thy cities are thy gods, O Judah. And so you're talking to the deaf idols. They're deaf and they can't do anything for you. Go down to verse 29. He says, you're like incorrigible children that can't be controlled. And we know that when Israel transgressed, that God chastened them many times for their sins, but that still did not cause them to change their ways. And even in that, they blamed God for them being in the situation they were in. But God had to let them know, now you're in this situation of your own doing. It says, wherefore will ye plead with me? Ye all have transgressed against me, said the Lord. In vain have I smitten your children. They received no correction. Your own sword hath devoured your prophets like a destroying lion. O generation, see ye the word of the Lord. Have I been a wilderness unto Israel, a land of darkness? Wherefore say my people, we are lords, we will come no more unto thee. Can a maid forget her ornaments or a bride her attire? Yet my people have forgotten me days without number. Why trimmest thou thy way to seek love? Therefore have thou also taught the wicked ones thy ways. You are making yourself up. You know, that's what it means to, when he says to trim, it means to make yourself pretty, to make yourself beautiful. It's enticing, to make yourself enticing. Also in thy skirts is found the blood of the souls of the poor innocents. I have not found it by secret search, but upon all these. Yet thou sayest, because I am innocent, and this is Israel always went back to this, because I am innocent, surely his anger should turn from me. Behold, I will plead with thee, because thou sayest, I have not sinned. Again, they thought that they had a favored position with God, and that God would, in their favored position, it's kind of like he would turn a blind eye or wink at what they were doing. And that's just not the case. God said, he reminded the people how richly he had blessed them, yet they rebelled against him, forgot him, and lied to him, claiming to be innocent. So, because the nation at that time was enjoying a measure of political and economic prosperity, they concluded that God's blessing was proof of their innocence, because things were going good, because they were still, you know, in their mind, they were still being blessed. And so it's like, if God is still doing this for us, then, you know, everything must be all right. But I mean, you know, you can still receive God's blessings and you still not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Because God is God. Because God is God. He says, therefore the showers, in verse 3, chapter 3, verse 3, the showers have been withholden, and there hath been no latter rain, and thou hast a whore's forehead, thou refusest to be ashamed. And we talked about that earlier. And we know when Sister Jean was talking about Israel being tied to the land, one thing is in the land that they needed was a latter rain, kind of like the rain we got last night. The rain that comes in the spring, the rain that comes when the crop needs it the most. That's what it needs most in order for it to be bountiful, in order for it to survive and be fruitful and produce. It needs a latter rain. God says that I'm withholding the showers, and there hath been no latter rain. And thou hast a whore's forehead, thou refuse to be ashamed. Wilt thou not from this time cry unto me, my Father? Thou art the guide of my youth. I want to, I have just a little more to talk about that, but I want to do, let's see. I want to do a let's talk about it, and here's what I want to do, okay? So we have just as a small number of us here. I tell you what, we're just going to have one group. And let's see. Don't be looking down at the floor. We're looking down at the floor. Sister Madeline, your hair is so cute. I'm just going to have to make you do. How and why do we make decisions contrary to God's plan? Okay. Okay, that question is not up there. The one I just asked is not up there. How and why do we make decisions contrary to God's plan? And then that's the next question that's on that slide. So follow up those questions with the one that's on the slide. Do decisions we make contrary to God's plan always lead to bondage? That's just for discussion. Okay, so for number one, how and why do we make decisions contrary to God's plan? Number two, do decisions we make contrary to God's plan always lead to bondage? Okay, take a little time and discuss that.
One one of the things they mentioned was control, wanting to be in control, depending on self. It was also brought up that men are the people who like to be in control, and women are the people who technically want to fix things. One of the points that were brought up was we don't think that we need God sometimes, or we are led by our flesh. Simply that we are not God, we are men, so we're going to mess up.
I think that's absolutely why we do what we do. We want to, and it was just what we were talking about earlier, because we want to be in control of the situation, and it is gender specific. We each gender has their own reason for wanting to be in control. One thing, we think we're smarter than y'all. And so what we're saying is, let me get back to the yard situation. You see how much it rained, don't you? And so the grass would have been right back up to where it is now. And so that's the only reason. So we just think we're smarter, y'all. That's all. And then y'all had to let us know that I'm the man. Okay? And so then, and sometimes we get all the way off, trying to prove a point. You know, each one of us trying to prove a point. And so, even if it's contrary to what we know God has set out for us, we just do it as a control issue. What's some of the other ones? I like every one of them.
On the same question? Or
On the same question.
It was also brought up that we were the seeds of Abraham, and that we're by nature we're going to sin or try to fix seeds of Adam. Sorry, that we were impatient people, and we want things to be done quickly and in the now.
Okay, awesome. And those are all.
Y'all gonna have to speak up a little bit. We can't hear back here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
You. Turn it on.
Oh, no, it's on. Yeah, it's on. Let's see. Yeah, it's on. But you know, we're a little timid when we come to speaking up. You know that. If we're not fussing at our husband, we timid about speaking in the mic. Now, come on, give us a break. Okay, great. Those were awesome answers. So then, let's talk about number 2. Do decisions we make contrary to God's plan always lead to bondage? And I think I threw the word always in there to help us to think. So what do y'all think? What did y'all think?
Okay, Lady Deborah. We said no. Most of us agreed that no, not always.
Okay.
We're not always going to go through right to bondage. We may, of course, we're going to reap what we sow, and there is some suffering that comes along with that. And it was also brought up that there's also grace for us as well.
Okay, and I like that too. I like those answers too.
I want somebody to explain to me then, how can you make a decision contrary to God's plan and not going by?
The reason I said that, I told the group no, is but bondage is a state where that you're captive, where you're captive, where you, okay, and I made the example of that we're in society, and you know, you're a prosecutor, okay? I do something wrong and I go before the court. Everybody that goes before the court is not going to go to prison. You're gonna have a man that comes before you that's going to go to prison, but the person that goes before you, although he might not go to prison, he might get a misdemeanor, or he might have something on his record. It's still something that he'll have to deal with, but not necessarily going to prison. The same is with God. Although, you know, some things that we might do, man, we might be in that situation for years. The stronghold, what we're doing because of the decision we make, we're not always going to be in that situation if we make that decision with God. We might have to deal with things, you feel me? You know, but we're not going to just be in bondage. That was an example I made.
But I was thinking that anytime you're dealing with the consequences, that's a form of bondage. And if anytime you contrary or do something against God's will, and then I consider you are gonna be, and you know, you're trying to do it on your own. Anytime you're trying to do something on your own and outside of God's will, you're gonna get a, you know, you're gonna get automatically be in bondage.
This is like a man and wife, right? Some people gonna get a divorce by the consequences that they make. Some people, the wife gonna forgive them and they're gonna be home. But when you go home every day, you're gonna have to deal with that woman. Actually, you're gonna have to deal with that. Looking at you, you know what I mean? You know, you still gonna have to deal with it. You feel me? Yeah, but because of the decisions, like we said, because of the decisions you make. You know what I mean? So I think that always was a trigger. I mean, I don't think always is permanent. Bondage is permanent. Bondage is like you're there. I just don't believe that God is such a just God. God is such a bigger God than what we know. I just don't. I think with Adam and Eve, were they always in bondage? It's bigger. It's bigger than what we.
Yeah, I think we're looking at semantics with some of it, because certainly, I think every one of us in here has done something contrary, made a decision to do something on our own that was contrary. That was contrary to God's plan for us. You understand what I'm saying? And some of the things that we do, I think it's a matter of probably what it is and what you're doing. You know what? Because some of us started doing something 20 years ago that we're still doing. And if that ain't bondage, I don't know what is. But then some of us did something 20 years ago that we had never done that again. And we hadn't done that again. Now, we might have made another decision to do something else. So I think it's just a way, it's semantic. I do. Uh-huh.
So if we talking about it towards God, he also saying that he is a forgiving God. So if you are in bondage, he's gonna hold you in bondage for the things that you do, and you're supposed to be under grace, which is, you know, if you say by grace through faith.
Yeah, but I don't think it's God that have you in bondage. It's you're in bondage yourself. Yeah, you're in bondage yourself.
You turn your life around, then you release from bondage.
Well, not necessarily. God does not hold you in bondage. God doesn't do that.
You don't keep that over your head.
No, God doesn't do that. But then, yes, sir, we do. We most definitely do. And well, no, you don't. But that's how you got there in the first place. You put yourself there in the first place. Now let's go back to Israel. Let's go back to Israel. God freed them from bondage. God brought them out of bondage. First time in Egypt. Okay, so they're out of bondage. But just like we're talking about this morning, I brought you out, but you put yourself back in. And you put yourself back in by the decisions you made. Nobody tell you to do that.
Not standing on faith.
So the way they went into bondage was because they stopped trusting God. Stopped trusting God. And I mean, bondage can be argued. You know, what's bondage to me may not be bondage to you. You can argue that. But whenever I don't trust God, I go into bondage. And the worst bondage is right here. I can sit up here and look just as wonderful to you, and we've all learned how to smile. You better. You learn how to smile despite it. Despite what's going on this morning, despite what you got to face when you go home, you learn how to smile because it ain't everybody's business. You see? But you're still in bondage. And until my mind is free.
Good points. I think all of those are good points, and I think it's something that bears discussing. Because, like certainly, at some point, we all have some type of bondage going on that we need to be freed from. We do.
You mentioned 20 years ago, you do things, and other folks will bring it back up.
True, true, true.
I find that's more likely to hold me in bondage. Is resentments.
Yeah.
It's hard to deal with. And I was talking about the thing with like devil. I'm going on my mind. Should I be honest? And should I tell you that I was offended? Or should I just leave that alone and let it go? Because the thing about it is, you feel what you feel. And the worst thing in the world to tell somebody is, you ain't got no business feeling like that. What does that do? You know, telling me I don't have no business feeling. I feel it. Whether I'm right or wrong, that's how I feel about it.
True, true.
And the truth of the matter is, even among husband and wife, it's more deception among husband and wife than it is with anybody. We're more honest with other folks than we are with each other. You know, and that's what I would like to do. I would like to develop to the point where I can just tell you how I feel. But if I tell you how I feel, and then don't make me feel less than because I feel that. Give some type of validity to my feelings, and to me, that's maturation. But that wasn't what I saw when I was growing up. What I saw when I was growing up is my mom and dad, they held what they held until they just blew up. Then they got to talk about, you know, my dad didn't do it, but mom got to talk all about his mom. I mean, that's, hey, don't make her no bad person. Or nothing like that. So we have not learned how to communicate.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And you brought up the point about maturation. Here's the deal. When you called me back about the yard, I knew he got upset. I could tell. You know, we've been together almost 40 years. I know when he's upset. And so when I said, no, I don't want to do that, he just got really, really quiet. I hung up the phone, and I said, when I hung up the phone, Lord, I just made him mad. And we went on back to doing what I was doing. But anyway, good.
Why you didn't just address that when you saw me and said, you know what? I think
Well, why didn't you just say to me?
I just said to you because I thought I would make things worse. And if you had come to me, boy, it would make me feel so much better. It's like she recognizes my feelings.
He says that now. Do y'all really think that's how it would have played out? No. You know, when